Hi guys! Welcome to my new video. So good you're back, so happy to see you. So today I want to show you how to make a shirt like this. I call it the Polo Placket. I'm not sure if this is the correct word, but let's just call it that. So this is actually set straight into the fabric. So it's stitched just kind of like there's just a cut. So we have to draft this part, and then we have to also draft this placket piece, which is actually exactly the same as the placket we did for the sleeve. So not that hard, just a little bit different dimensions and somewhere else, so to say. I made a couple of like little blunder. Don't worry about it. I figured it out and I will announce every time I made a little like blunder, but don't worry, it'll all be fine. I want to go step by step through the whole process from drafting to actually sewing it. But I'm not going to focus too much on things that we have done earlier. So like stitching the sleeves or the side seams, I'm going to kind of fast forward through that because I want to highlight really how to do this collar solution. And this is what we are going to do today. So let's start with the first part, which is the drafting part. We are going to use our made-to-measure shirt block from last time, but we are obviously going to change a little bit and play around with it and create these new pattern pieces. And then I'm going to cut it off from both the Polo Placket jersey that I'm using, but also a woven cotton linen mix that I'm using for some of the parts, especially the details, but also the back. This is quite interesting because in this video then I can also show you how to use these mixed materials and how to make finishes for them. We always need a combination of overlock and regular sewing machine for this to get the finished. So first things first, let's start to draft. And let's grab our made-to-measure shirt block and move over to the drafting table. Let's go. So guys, let's get started and let's trace the front pattern piece, but without the placket extension, so just until center front. So I'm going to do that real quick. And don't forget to mark the seam allowance. Today we are going to play around with the closing and the collar of our shirt. So we also need the yoke piece for that. So we have the entire neckline at our disposal. And then we can start. So the polo collar is basically a cut into the center front, and then we add a placket to that. So first we have to mark this cut, and I want to do it all the way down to the arm sky level, which is 15.2 cm, but then we have to add that 1 cm seam allowance there, which is already in the pattern, so it's 16.2, and that is our starting point. We draft a vertical line that is 16.2 centimeters. And then we want to add seam allowance 0.5 to the left and the right. Then we create kind of a box with that. And now we extend the bottom line 1.5 and 1.5 to the right and 2 plus 3 to the left. The 1.5 is for under wrap and the 2 and 3 is for the over wrap. So now I have finished that as a box too, and I have marked these lines. Now we want to add a little bit on the bottom there, which will be kind of the seam allowance piece, something, I don't know how to call it. I'm also even not sure if this is called a polo placket, but I want to call it this way. So I've added something to the bottom, actually 2 cm to that 3 cm wide piece, and then seam allowance 1 cm all the way around. So the next step is the facing for the neckline. I don't want to have a collar, I just want to have a facing underneath. And I'm marking 4 cm, which basically already includes 1 centimeter seam allowance on the top, and then we have another centimeter just in case we want to for folding it in, and the total will be 2 cm, which is very nice and thin. And we are going to do the same on the yoke's neck line. So we are marking always 4 cm, and we are actually almost done. Now we have to trace that facing, and we want to trace it basically connected. So we trace one part first, and then we trace the other part. So we are starting with the yoke, center back, and then continue to the front. Now I did a little bit of a mistake here. I did center front unfold, which is stupid. So, well, it has to be the center back that is unfold. And then we also want to add a good bit of seam allowance to center front, actually like a 2 cm, 3 cm maybe even, because we need more for the overlap and underwrap. So let's put all the pieces together and see if they line up. So let's check first the shoulder. Let's place the yoke. We have to place the seam allowances on top of each other, like the dotted lines, to actually see it. And the back is also a little bit shorter than the front there. So we have together when we're stitching. And now let's fold this placket piece. So let's fold that shorter part. Let's fold the 1.5 cm and the 1 cm seam allowance to the inside. So we have this little flap that covers our center line. And then we do exactly the same with the overlap. We're folding it in the seam allowance in and then overlapping the other one. So there's our front facing placket and the yoke piece. Now that we've done all the drafting, it's time to grab our new pattern pieces and cut them from material. And the first part I want to cut from this jersey polo piqué, and then the next bit will be cut from a cotton linen mix, which will be the lower back piece, but also all of these little details here, like the placket, the facing. So let's go and do that now real quick. So the front and the yoke and the sleeve I will cut from a polo piqué jersey, and the lower back piece as well as all the little details I will cut from a regular white shirting fabric. And don't forget to add the seam allowance on the seams that don't have any. And also, while I was at it, I made the back a little bit longer by moving my pattern piece along center back. So now the facing, this is where I cut it wrong with center front unfold. And now I'm cutting the placket. And I'm actually basically tracing all of these lines onto my fabric, almost all of them, with my pencil, which washes out. You can also use one of these markers that can be washed, because we want to have like exact measurements there, because we need to fold it and stitch it. It has to be perfect. I also made that V cut a little bit wrong. You can see on the left side, this is where it has to be actually. Now that we have all of our cut pieces at hand, it's time to stitch them together. And we want to start from the back. So let's first connect the yoke and the lower back piece by pleating this back piece and stitching them together. So let's start assembling the shirt, and as usual, first things first, we want to pleat that lower back piece, which is a woven fabric, and then I'm gonna stitch it to the yoke, which is a polo piqué. And here it is pleated, and I'm gonna pin it together and then off to the machine. Since this is a woven plus a jersey, I'm just gonna stitch it with a regular machine, because there's no real imminent danger of seams breaking, because the woven fabric kind of stabilizes it. When we are going to polo piqué plus polo piqué seams, I want to always overlock first. So now I'm overlocking actually in the second step, so the raw edges are cleaned up, and then I want to top stitch the seam allowance, fold it towards the yoke. So it actually looks a bit like we have a double yoke, but this is a quite heavy polo piqué, so I didn't want to go double layer because it's too hot. So top stitched, all nice. So the back piece is finished. So let's go straight for the front and the polo placket. So I first placed it on top of the fabric, and I've put it underneath. And I flip the fabric because we are stitching it to the back of the fabric, the left side. And I've also used a little bit of ironing glue to fix it perfectly in place. I don't have interfacing and the glue does a very good job. Now I'm stitching that box first, which is the seam allowance 05 that I drew left and right of the main line. So I'm stitching the box, needle in the corner, lift the footer, turn with the needle in the fabric and all the way around. So this was probably the hardest part of it all. So now I'm gonna slash through the central line and also that little V-shaped cut there into the corners, so I have nice and clean corners. The V is basically the seam allowance for the little top edge. So off the machine to the table, and now I wanna iron it into shape. So I'm starting from one side. This is the under wrap, I think, or the overlap. I can't really see now. I think this is the overlap actually. So I'm gonna put that in shape, and now I'm flipping it around because I wanna do the under wrap first. So we're folding everything towards the placket, and then I'm gonna fold the 1 cm seam allowance and that edge very nicely. So the edge first, and now the seam allowance 1 cm, and then I want to fold all of that so it covers the initial seam, and I'm basically folding it all the way to the seam so it's on that stitched line. Now let's make the lower part a little bit nicer and iron it as well. We want to have as little creases as possible, and now I'm making the overlap. So first I do the seam allowance 1 cm to the inside, and then I fold it back again to the other side, to the stitched seam, and now it completely covers the under wrap, which is what we want. Now just fold the bottom part 1 cm in, make sure that all the seam allowance is very neatly folded, and we are ready to top stitch this. So same as the ironing, we want to start with the under wrap. So we are stitching that down, and we're starting from kind of the middle of the garment, so like the lower part of the placket, and I'm just gliding along the edge basically with my footer, so I get this beautiful 0.1 cm top stitch. Now let's fix the overlap a little bit. We have to stitch it kind of like around the corner there as well, because the bottom needs to be fixed. So needle in the corner, lift the footer, stitch around, and then maybe like a 2 cm on the under wrap side, and then I cross over and I make a little box. And now I want to kind of stitch a little X through that box. It's a bit of an outdoorsy kind of finishing detail, but I think it is kind of cute there. You can also leave it just like that for a bit more minimalist approach, but I went for the more sporty X. So that's done. Now we can attach the shoulder seams. So shoulder seam is jersey on jersey. So again, I want to overlock that first. One by one, and then let's move over to the regular sewing machine and stitch alongside this overlock. The nice thing is that the overlock kind of like spares me the pinning, and it fixes everything nicely together, and I just have to stitch alongside a footer's width, and I have a total of 1 cm seam allowance. Now I want to fold that towards the yoke and top stitch it so I have a similar optic to the seam at the yoke. So that's all good now, and I am ready to put the facing. So the facing I have already overlocked and I want to start pinning it from center back, and then from the back towards the front, each side at a time. And when I reach the placket, I have kind of like a shorter seam allowance and a longer seam allowance, and I actually just folded that to the inside all the way around and pinned that as well. So I get a very, very clean finish at the edge. So let's stitch that. You can see here I like wrapped it around, and now just kind of right side on right side, stitch, stitch, stitch. And you can see with that seam allowance folded in, super nice. So the next thing now is slashing this seam allowance. Because it is very round and very curvy, it doesn't want to fold to the inside. So we have to release that kind of tension and slash it everywhere. We do that to every kind of like round seam. And now it falls to the inside very nicely. So we want to iron that and also kind of pin that down so it stays in place. Especially around the placket, we want to already fold it very, very nicely so you can see any of that facing from the outside. And now we could theoretically just top stitch that with the overlocked edge, or what I will do now is fold it all in. I have a spare centimeter to do that, and actually I didn't fold the entire centimeter, just the overlock. And I will also use now a little bit of that ironing glue tape. There you go, this kind of like netting stuff, net. And I'm gonna fix it every now and then so it's really safe in place. Because the tricky part is now to top stitch it. If we don't want to top stitch it, we can just do like a blind stitch by hand and make it all very clean. But I'm going for the more outdoorsy finish, so I want to top stitch it, and you have to do that from the right side, so you get the beautiful stitch. And I did it actually kind of a good 3 cm now. How much? Like 2 cm top stitch probably. Don't remember. So just enough to get the edge of your facing. And just to be sure, I actually went back again and I did a second row of top stitch, 0.5 next to the other. And there you go, all done. And now it's all falling beautifully in place. It's a very nice round neckline. Has a bit of a like a keyhole shape to it. So we're gonna clean it all up. Let's get rid of all the little threads, and then we can put the sleeves. I'm not gonna show you that. I actually just overlocked the sleeves, and then I also just overlocked the side seams. I yet have to do the hemline, but it's already kind of wearable, so I like it. But I will put bias tape along the hemline probably. And here you can also see that the back is actually like maybe 3 centimeters longer than the front. This is something I did when I was cutting the fabric. So, and we're done. So guys, the shirt is done. What I have now added off camera was these lovely rib cuffs. And I've done the sleeves and I've ironed everything. So I hope you like it. As usual, I love it and I'm gonna wear it all the time. Unfortunately, this is a very hot polyester, so I had to put the AC on 16 just to sit in this room. It's so burning hot these days. It's almost unbearable. I hope everybody is safe at home. Anyway, thank you so much, guys. See you soon. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm very happy you made it all the way through. And please also follow me on Instagram. You can find me under my name, Tobias Conrad. Follow me, subscribe. See you soon, everybody.